Everybody take their seats, please. Okay, so the next talk is by Kevin, and it's on pursuing KDE Neon Core.
All right, thank you. Thank you and welcome. So this will be an update on the KDE Neon Core project from last year. So for those who don't know me, so I'm Kevin Otens. I've been using the KDE software at the end of the 20th century, and I started contributing at the very beginning of the 21st century. Well, obviously I fell in love with the community, which is why I'm here. And I've been doing things here and there. Nowadays, so I work for Enyoka Haute Couture, where we're a consultancy, we're doing development, trainings, coaching, all of that. And that's how we actually bumped into this project that I will talk about. And I'm a remote worker living in Toulouse. So first, I will have a quick recap from where we were last year. So on the previous episode on that show, we talked about Ubuntu Core, which is, as they say on basically their website, it's a minimal, secure, and strictly confined operating system. It's been mainly designed for embedded systems. That's basically the immutable version of Ubuntu, supposed to be secure by design, containerized, and so on. All the components are provided as snaps, though. Even the kernel, the snap daemon, are provided as snaps. And so you get over-the-air updates with rollback for any components in there. 2 years ago, they announced what they called Ubuntu Core Desktop, which is the fully containerized desktop. And that's basically a full desktop session on top of Ubuntu Core. The idea is to have similar benefits, but for user-facing GUIs, with better security, stability, because the updates you can always roll back and you don't have the system in an unstable state. It's easier also to audit a system as long as you know the packages which are in there. And there's no inconsistency from system to system. Obviously, it comes with extra challenges compared to the full embedded use case. It's harder to draw the boundaries between the desktop components themselves, and it tends to use more storage kind of due to that. On our side, so we have KDE Neon, which is built on top of the latest Ubuntu LTS release, with the issues which come with that Harald mentioned last year. The idea being to showcase KDE exactly as we, KDE developers, intended it. And so no patches, no changes on the default settings. So rolling KDE software on top of stable Ubuntu base. And you get a very up-to-date experience. So the idea with the KDE Neon Core project was to follow similar idea, so have the same benefit, but on top of Ubuntu Core instead of regular Ubuntu. So it has a similar architecture to the Ubuntu Core desktop as planned by the canonical folks. You get the Plasma-based user experience, latest versions, that's the idea. And we provide the building blocks to package KDE applications as a snap for use inside of Ubuntu Core. Which leads us to where we were last year. So when I presented last year, that's pretty much the architecture we had. So I'm a bit too short to point to blocks, so I hope you will be able to follow along. But basically, so we covered as part of the project a few applications, all of those using what they call a content snap, to have the KFC execute runtime. And then for the session, you would have the Plasma Desktop Session Snap, which is a regular application snap from the perspective of Snapd. And This one is basically empty, getting all its content for the base snap, which was just under, so the Plasma Core 22 desktop one. And so the applications and the runtime on the top right corner, they are built from source, but the content, the base snap here was built from the packages coming from Neons. Okay, so we're reusing the packages as is. And so we ran the full session, confined. We had SDDM, which was not confined though. I will come back to that. And the other thing we were providing, as I mentioned, that was the building blocks for the apps, okay? I won't focus much on this part this year because that's basically, that stayed as it was since last year. We basically updated everything which is marked Core 22 there has been updated to Core 24, but that's most of the changes which happened since last year. We also had some challenges last year with quite some of the tooling, which was unfriendly to rootless containers, to say the least. So we had a VM on which we had SSH access. So in a way, that was coordinated with the KDE sysadmins. So in a way, we helped to have the blueprint for the VMs that we have now, which have been deployed by the KDE sysadmins this year. We also had GUI tests, which I mentioned as WIP up there, on the CI path to validate the applications. So that's something we completed, but I will come back to that particular part of the story a bit later. And also, so we talked about how the snap confinement works, including how the interfaces are implemented with seccomp and AppArmor. I won't get back into this. One thing I will get back into is how we integrated the systemd units, which are necessary for the session, into all of that. That part changed quite a bit. And also, we've seen some of the problems which were created by talking to systemd at startup. Again, I will come back to this, because we had a specific interface for that inside of a snapd fork that's still there. And I also had plenty of stories of how to horribly broke Queen and get black screens all the time, basically. And we had some patches to snapd, and so black screens, a lot of them. All right, so what's new? Last year, so I presented some of the challenges which I mentioned there of building all of that. There were quite a few, but I also gave ideas on how you can debug them and where the important integration points were. Today, I will focus mostly on what changed during the past year and the new challenges and opportunities coming with that. So the obvious big change that the reworked architecture, this was the obvious big topic, and I closed my talk last year on that. And we had a different target architecture in mind. So let's have a refresher. So that's the one you've just seen, okay? That's what we delivered last year. It was not ideal, and well, we had to go with that because of various constraints that we didn't control, but where we wanted to go, it's this one. So we wanted to move everything out of the base snap, basically, okay? So that we could reuse the regular core base snap. That's the intent. Because we wanted to do this, that meant that the Plasma desktop session, right, if you look at before, it was getting all its stuff, all the binaries from the base snap. Okay, if we reuse the regular base snap, we cannot do that anymore. So we need to have a content snap just for that, to provide those binaries so that the other snap can do its job. So we wanted to decouple from the base, and we wanted to be able to slice things up a bit more, because now we got the SDDM application snap, which appears in there. All right, so that's the target. That's where we got in 2025. So it's a bit of the seventh difference game. Did you notice that? I do it again. You see them? There are two main differences. So the content snap actually is there, so we really do that. But if you look, so we didn't get SDDM, and there's a reason for that, I will get to it. And if you look the Core 24, we're not quite using it, right? So we're using a Core 24 that we are not making, okay, which is made by the canonical people, but that's the Core 24 desktop one. Okay, so that's the one with GDM and all of GNOME and so on, right, which is in there. The reason why, it's because we don't have SDDM yet. We need to have a login manager, okay? And so, well, if you remove SDDM of the picture, then you end up with having GDM because that one they already provided for free for us, right? So that's kind of an intermediate step. And there's another reason, which I will explain further, which is on the fact that we can't do this bit yet for SDDM because there are missing facilities on Snapd at the moment that which prevent us from having a proper SDDM package yet. I will get to it. All right. So the impacts, well, that just doing this, though, even though we are not at the end at the target that we had in mind, that brought some changes and impacts throughout the product. So we will talk about those now. One thing is the relationship to KDE Neon, right? Because as I mentioned last year, we were basically using the deb packages getting from the archive for everything. But now, if I get back to this, you notice that we use the content snap, okay? And that content snap uses the KF6 runtime. And that one, last year we were building, and we're still building it from scratch, right? So by doing this, we end up kind of having to build the content snap for the plasma binaries as well, right? That reduces quite a few risks doing this. And so that means we kind of parted ways with the KDE packages in the Neon archive. Okay, we're building the KDE stuff on top. That's more convenient for several things because, as I mentioned, potentially different ABI because we're using the build KF6. And also we're changing the prefix and the deb packages, they kind of assume that they are in /USR. Well, so we could get more control this way. We're still using the KDE Neon archive though, but for the dependencies, right? Because those dependencies, well, some of them, that's for updated, they're updated faster. So we could almost cut the ties, but all dependencies outside of Qt and KDE, they are bumped quite quickly in a way, right? In a matter of months since the release of Noble, we sometimes require new APIs in those dependencies, okay? This doesn't make it easy on a stable base with a limited set of official backports. It's not quite a surprise. That's exactly what Harald was complaining about with KDE Neon in the first place. So no surprise there, but that just shows up in a different way here. So the question, obviously, is could we manage to bump dependencies less aggressively? Yes, no, right? That's thing we could think about, right? Like, for instance, Queen already depends on a very different deep display info. Is that something which we could have been more diligent in, like, supporting both APIs for a while before breaking this, or do we want to move faster? So that's something we have to figure out, I guess, as a community. If not, I mean, if we want to keep doing it like this, then it's kind of convenient to still have such an archive. And I would lean toward keeping it for this kind of extended backports because they don't exist in the official Ubuntu backports, but probably trying to keep it minimal, at least from the KDE Neon Core perspective. All right. And so the problems we got, well, plenty, of course. That's a dramatic change, right? We did three things at the same time. We bumped to a new base distro, we moved to a different prefix, and we started to compile everything ourselves, right, for the session. So that's quite a few moving pieces at the same time. So the first one is that, obviously, well, I cannot find my binaries, and well, some stuff, like the Qt and KDE stuff, you just set a few environment variables, say, there, it's not in USR, that's fine, it's there, and it works, right? There are no big surprises there. Some of the dependencies of all of that are a bit less nicer in that regard. And so for some of them, if you dig in the code, you might find some environment variable, but which is supposed really to be used only for development purposes, so you can't really rely on that. Or you can use an extra feature of of the snaps that we didn't quite use last year, which is the layout, where you basically create bind mounts from the perspective of the confinement or symlinks, which exist only in the confinement, to present the right path for those dependencies. The other one was where we moved our systemd services again, so now I cannot find my systemd services anymore. So we needed a way for systemd to see them. So to bootstrap the session, there's actually a wrapper script, which is provided inside of the Core 24 desktop. So we're basically doing that very ugly trick where we basically expose them in some way. We symlink to the right place, right? Hijacking one of the folders which is not used, and then we restart systemd. Now it goes a bit further because, as I mentioned last year, but that was less of a problem because of the packages we were providing enough information, but we don't quite control the systemd services because they are generated by snapd, okay? So the content, the names, okay, we control inside of our content snap. But they don't map to anything else on the snapd side, okay? Because they're all generated with snapd, some ID, and so on, right? So we can predict those, but we cannot provide them because they will be created at runtime by snapd. And that's convenient for us to still use the name, or names, right? The name of our services, right? So inside of the content snap, we're basically killing all the services files which have been created by our build, and we replace them with symlinks to places where we know that snapd will create them under another name, right? So all our services files disappear, and instead we have aliases against the snapd ones. Now the problem is that snapd, when it generates them, it does a very limited job, so it doesn't give more advanced relationships like the one we use. Like for all our services, we're saying they are part of the graphic section target. And that's gone, right? So then when you boot, and especially when you exit, that's very interesting because you have services which lie around. So next to the symlinks I just mentioned, we also have override files to be able to compensate for that and inject basically what we are missing. That's all to try to bypass limitations on the systemd side. We also had surprise with the desktop portal, and we had from the beginning most problems with it. And well, it's kind of sensitive to startup conditions, so we had to have some extra care for that. Especially because we're in a situation there where XDG desktop portal is not confined, but XDG desktop portal KDE is confined, right? So that comes with interesting challenges. And so it started after Start Plasma pushed its environment to systemd via the interface I mentioned last year. And so it tries to find libraries and config in the wrong place, right? Because XGG desktop portal is started outside the confinement. So it doesn't see the layout changes we did. It doesn't see like the build we have, right, with the libraries in a different prefix and so on. But because start plus map pushed the environment there, it's trying to look there and it's going to, well, that folder doesn't exist, right? So we, again, had to trick it a bit, injecting an override file just for that, and to be able to start the XGG desktop portal while resetting the environment just for this one. Also, we ship inside of the session a couple of applications, so think system settings, think KInfo Center. Okay, so for those we have desktop files. And those desktop files, we build in a prefix, right? But then inside, because of the snaps, you can have several versions of them. You don't exactly know the path. You cannot hardcode the path inside of the desktop file like we do during our build, right? You cannot do that. So instead, you have to say, well, I need the exec line to not be a fixed path, but to depend on the environment so that it actually picked at the right place at runtime. So that's why we have that bit of script there to patch all the desktop files which are provided with the session to say, look, it's not where you think it is. It starts from the snap environment variable, and it's somewhere in there, because that one is tied to the actual snap version which is running. Next to that, we also had to have some improvement to snapd itself. So I mentioned already the patches that we did last year, which were a bit outstanding, right? Now they're, apart from the systemd user control one, they are all merged into snapd upstream. So that's a good thing. But we still have that crucial one to be able to talk to snapd. There's been also other changes which were more driven by Canonical, actually, because there's plenty of services inside of the Core 24 desktop one. They wanted to move out, for instance, Pipewire to get it out of that base snap. But if you do that and you start to confine Pipewire, then you need the session to be able to talk to Pipewire for the screen sharing. So they changed snapd so that there's a specific interface now for desktop sessions to be able to talk to Pipewire. Right? So that's kind of where they are going. So they are trying to get UDisk2 out of the base snap as well and so on. So they are removing more and more stuff from their base snap, and we have more interfaces to support as a result. The systemd user control didn't make it upstream, and there are more changes which would be necessary to complete the transition. Okay, that's what I mentioned in the beginning, where we are not at the target yet. That's mostly because of those things. Like we would like to be able to properly describe the services dependencies, so that we don't have to do the ugly hacks that we are doing throughout, right? And there's no way to do that. We need a way also for a snap to be able to start another one, because that's exactly what SDDM does, right? If you confine SDDM, then you're inside of a snap. The whole point of a snap is that you cannot trigger something else, right? Because then that would be a problem, right? And SDDM is exactly in that situation, right? Or Plasma Login Manager or whatever. So there's a need for some mechanism to do that, and that's something which is still on the drawing board that they didn't implement yet. There's also some issues potentially with the PAM handling, which again SDDM needs, right? And you need to be able to escape just for that, and we're missing interfaces there. So that's those two things which kind of prevent us to get all the way to where we want it to be. So what else happened? Well, there's been some coordination through the Snap Store, right? Because we submit to the Snap Store. That coordination is generally a bit slow. It adds quite a bit of delay to things because they need to check which new interface you use. And as I mentioned, we had to use new interfaces that they introduced. And then they're very picky, but why did you introduce that? But you introduced it first for us. Now I just want to make use of it, right? Now, to be fair, it's kind of their job to make sure that nothing bad gets in, right, and tries to get more privileges than it should. So it's normal that they actually check that, but sometimes it can be a bit frustrating because that makes a longer feedback loop. One other thing which has been a bit of a problem for us, that the Selenium WebDriver IT Spy bridge, it's a great idea on paper. It has been a constant headache in practice. The Kate people probably remember that because we submitted some Appium tests for them, and it was breaking so often on the CI that we had to remove them. So the thing is, because I'm doing other stuff in other parts of the industry, it's kind of a constant we see on other projects, I mean, professionally outside of KDE, that the Selenium tests, they tend to be very, very flaky, right? And that's not new, right? And it's no wonder why on the web space, Playwright is actually way more popular than Selenium at that point. Well, there's nice tooling around it and so on, but the core sell point of it is that they are not flaky, okay? And that's a big change. It's way more reliable. We also had more ways to engage with the Ubuntu community and the canonical folks. So I could advertise what we've been doing because we talked about it at Academy, that I could advertise it at the Ubuntu Summit last year. And I also ended up in some architecture body around Snapd with the canonical folks to flesh out some of what do we need from a session's perspective, and especially from a Plasma session perspective, because the needs are not exactly the same than the GNOME one, so I brought that extra perspective to poke, hopefully, in the right direction. We got all the way to having a basic installer. We have ISOs and so on, which we didn't quite have last year. I'm actually happy that we helped a bit the KDE sysadmin to inform on the CI changes for the transition. And I'm coming also with bad news. It's currently the project has been, at least funding-wise, the project has been paused. And that's mainly because Canonical changed priorities internally. And that's why that impacts the funding, because we are basically funded by Canonical for that. And that means that the Snapd changes I mentioned, they are not going to appear very, very fast now, right? Now, I think it happened, so that's my personal opinion on that. Maybe the canonical folks have a different perspective, but I feel it happened in part because the needs of the desktop session, being it the GNOME one that they were working on their side or the Plasma one that we've been working on, is actually very demanding on Snapd, right? That creates, as I mentioned, right, having the right separations between the components. That's there's way more of those as soon as you're making a desktop, and they're not necessarily. That's a lot of interfaces to introduce and things to design and so on, right? And so I think we got to the point where the Snapd team was like saturated, right? That's like drinking from the fire hose with like, all those demands, right? So I think that's in part why they need that pause to swallow some of that, right? Because they also have other demands for the embedded space, right? Which are different and so on. So now what, right? So I don't want to end this on a bad note like this. So the Enyoka Canonical joint project is paused, but everything we did is basically available. So what could we do with it, right? Where could we go from there as a community? So I think there's a path forward. I think we're advanced enough that with a few compromises, we can actually get to a full product which is not that far from what we wanted. The obvious sacrifice, as you can see coming, is the login manager, okay? And we could get to something where we have something in between the 2024 and the 2025 architecture, okay? So instead of using the Core 24 desktop base, we could get back to our own base, but we could make it way smaller. And we would have to accept to not have a confined login manager. But then the rest would be fairly stable and safe, right? So the blueprint for that would be, so to get back the gadget and the base snap that we have, but to change them, especially the base snap, and to make that base snap extremely lean, okay? So just the necessary to bootstrap the login manager, not even containing the login manager, but just having a bunch of scripts on top of Core 24 to bootstrap that without the confinement, and then you can still ship it as a snap, okay? But you just don't confine it. Have a couple of essential services, like the ones for which they didn't introduce interfaces yet, and especially XDG Desktop Portal. And then we can produce a snap for Plasma Login Manager, for instance, when it stabilizes, and run just this one unconfined. So it's a nice prospect, but there is a but. It's only worth it if we can get Canonical to accommodate us a bit for some things. Because if we do that, that cannot work with the upstream snapd, right? If you remember last year, if you remember now a bit earlier, I mentioned that we're running with a snapd fork, okay? Because, for instance, the systemd user control interface needs to be there, and this one didn't make it to upstream. There's a couple more patches that the Canonical people did on top of snapd for desktop-specific fork that is used by the GNOME session that we depend on as well. And so that means that this fork needs to keep living, right? And it cannot fall behind upstream snapd. So we need to get those patches rebased once every, I don't know, few months or something like this, okay? And the thing is, well, they paused, right? So that fork is dormant as well, so it risks to fall behind. So we would need to have an agreement between KDE and Canonical to allow us to actually do just that maintenance of rebasing the stuff from time to time, which is not necessarily a very big and horrible job, but that's still some work that needs to be done from time to time. I think that would be a good way for KDE to be proactive there in the relationship and to show some goodwill on the community side. Now, would Canonical accept that? I don't know, right? We have to ask and see, right? For me, there are good reasons to try this and pursue such an effort because it opens the door to parts of the industry we have troubles reaching today, I think. Basically, any Ubuntu Core device out there with a screen could benefit from something like I'm proposing we could do, okay? And I've been surprised when I got to the Ubuntu Summit, there are actually some of that happening. And we could get something usable anywhere. Plasma could be usable, so that's TVs, kiosks, point of sales, digital signage, some industry-specific devices, and so on. Especially for the embedded industry case, that's something where it used to be like very simple one-screen stuff, and they're shoving more features into this kind of stuff, where they start to figure that, yeah, I would like to have a window manager and stuff like that. We're already seeing some of those benefits, actually, even if that's small, admittedly. But there's, like on the SDK sides of things, and some of the apps, there's actually some interest. So I checked on, less for the apps, but more for the SDK. I checked for the use, so not just the runtime, which any application would pull, but really the SDK that the developers will need to try that stuff. There's actually more deployment, because we got a dashboard on the Snap Store. There's actually more deployments of that than I expected. even for the ARM64 ones that Carlos made last month, I think. So that would be interesting to see what we can get out of it. I actually have been in touch with so one company which is interested in that. And well, I'm trying to see if we can get them as sponsors and so on. So I will end on a few lessons learned there. So one thing is, as I mentioned, we might want to reevaluate our GUI testing story. So at that point, I'm to the point where I completely doubt the viability of Selenium for our use, unfortunately. Even though we didn't get to the target, the architecture we have this year feels way more robust than the one we had last year. Well, I had surprises to move from one to the other, but that's a net improvement. And of course, we depend on Canonical to make progress in the Ubuntu Core space. Surprise, right? But that's kind of how it is. And I think there are opportunities there if we want to seize them. If you want to contribute, so the code is at the same place than last year. So the first one is for producing the images. The second one, that's a group. And under that, there's all the snap packaging happening. There's some documentation on the wiki, and of course, you can come talk to us. I also would like to thank again the team on the Enyoka Haute Couture side, and Scarlett and Carlos, who did good work with us as contractors. There's a buff which Harald mentioned, and I will mention it as well. We are doing a buff about everything which is immutable distro related, be it KDE Linux, Fedora Kinuate, I'm not sure how that's pronounced. I just read it usually, and KDE Neon Core. So that will be Monday, 2 p.m. In room 1. Thanks for your attention. I think we might have time for maybe a question or two.
Who has a question?
How come all your systemd stuff isn't an already solved problem for your GNOME desktop? Your systemd issues that you had, how come they're not solved problems already for the GNOME desktop?
Very simple. They don't use systemd to boot up their session. No, so I think I'm 2 steps removed from the GNOME side of things, right? So I'm not sure if that's because that's a version that they still use in their base snap, which is before the move on the GNOME side. But all the calls I had with them, that was like, yeah, that's a problem we are going to have as well, right? We don't have it yet, but we are going to have it as well, right? So they know it's coming. It's just that to get their base snap with the version they were targeting, that was a non-issue back then, right?
Any more questions? Got time for like 1 or 2 more. Nope. All right then. Thank you very much.